Welcome to Gemara Academy. In this class, we will learn the Gemara Masechta Shabbos on Daf Chesam and Aleph and Daf Chesam and Beis. Let's begin by looking at a general outline of this class. So earlier on Daf Vavam and Aleph, we presented a brisa that spoke about the four Rishuyos of Shabbos: Rishus HaYachid, Rishus HaRabim, a Carmelis, and a Makim P'tor. Up to this point, the Gemara discussed the parts of the brisa that spoke about a Rishus HaYachid, Rishus HaRabim, and a Carmelis. And we continued in our discussion of these three Rishuyos. In our Gemara, we're going to continue on with this discussion. So we learned earlier that an object that's 4 by 4 tefachim wide and 3 to 10 tefachim high is a Carmelis. So in our Gemara, what we're going to have is as follows. The Gemara will present a case that's an exception to this. Although generally an object that's 4 by 4 tefachim wide and between 3 and 10 tefachim high is a Carmelis, and the Gemara now will present an exception to this. And related to this teaching, there's going to be two other things, which is, number one, the Gemara will present an argument by a similar case. We're going to begin by presenting a case that's an exception. The Gemara then will present another case that's similar to the exception. And over there's going to be an argument whether it's also an exception or not. And there's going to be the largest part of our Gemara. And number two, the second thing related to this case that's an exception is the Gemara will present a teaching related to this case. So that's the structure of the Gemara. And let's see it now in the flowchart form. So our Gemara is based on what we learned earlier, that an object between 3 and 10 tefachim high, and we're talking about an object that's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. So an object between 3 and 10 tefachim high in Rishus HaRabim is a Carmelis. So the Gemara begins by presenting a teaching from Ula on this, Amar Ula, and it's an arrow pointing upwards because it's related to what we learned. He made a comment about this, and he said, a post that's 9 tefachim high, that the public use, so we're referring to a post that's 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, it's 9 tefachim high, and the public use it. The way they use it is that if somebody's holding something, they want to rearrange it, they'll put it down on the post, rearrange it, and then pick it up again. So the din is, and a person threw an item onto it from a distance of 4 amas, he is chayev. If somebody threw an item 4 amas in Rishus HaRabim and it landed on the post, he's chayev. So Ula is telling us here that the post is considered part of the Rishus HaRabim, and therefore the person is chayev for throwing 4 amas in the Rishus HaRabim. And Ula explains the reason for this. Why is this post an exception to the general rule? My time, or what's the reason? So he goes through different categories of heights that this post could be. And he says, if it's lower than 3, if this post were to be lower than 3 tefachim, then people step on it. People would walk and step on the post, and therefore, since the public use it as part of the public area, it's considered part of the Rishus HaRabim. If it's 3 to 9 tefachim high, then they don't step on it because it's too high to step on. They don't need to use it. A person's not going to place something onto it because it's too low down to bend down and place something onto it. And if it's 9 tefachim, then mikatfim olav. They use it, they're going to place their objects in it. And as a result, since the public use it, it's considered part of the public area, and it's considered a Rishus HaRabim. So if it's lower than 3, it's part of the public area. If it's 9 tefachim, it's also part of the public area. And if it's between 3 and 9, since the public don't use it, it's considered removed from the Rishus HaRabim. It's a Rishus for itself, and it's going to be either a Makim P'tor or a Carmelis. So that's the teaching of Ula that directly relates to what we learned earlier. And now we're going to continue on to a side discussion on this. So let's begin with the first part, which is a similar case where there's going to be an argument whether it's also an exception or not. So Abaya asked Rav Yosef, Beguma Mai, what about a pit? Do we say that just like a post that's 9 tefachim high and 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, since the public use it, therefore it's considered part of the public area and it's Rishus HaRabim, so too a pit that's 9 tefachim deep and 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, since the public use it, it's part of the public area and it'll be a Rishus HaRabim. And like Rashi explains, the way the public use it is that at times a person would place something into the pit to go and then do something and come back to retrieve it. So do we also say that a pit is considered a Rishus HaRabim? So Rav Yosef answered, V'chein beguma, the same as by a pit. A pit is the same, just like the post is considered a Rishus HaRabim because the public use it. The pit is also considered a Rishus HaRabim because the public use it. However, Rava argues with this, and Rava said, Begumaloi, not by a pit. A pit is different. The pit's not going to be considered part of the Rishus HaRabim. And the opinion of Rava is explained. Rava said, what's my time, or what's the reason? Why is a pit different than a post? Because he says, Tashmish, al yedei adchak, loi shmei tashmish. Use, which is inconvenient and difficult, is not considered use. To use a pit is less convenient and less comfortable than to use the post. And therefore, it's not considered proper use. It's not considered to be part of the Rishus Harabim, and it'll be a Rishus for itself. It's going to be a Karmelis. So here we have presented the opinion of Rav Yosef and Rava, and now the Gemara is going to go ahead and present two difficulties, two questions on the opinion of Rava, and Rava will answer each of them. So the Gemara begins. Rav Adda bar Masna asked a question from a Brisa. So we're going to present the Brisa now in a arrow pointing upwards and downwards, because it's the background information to the question, and it'll lead into the actual question itself. So it says in a Brisa, if one's box was resting in the Rishus Harabim, the din is as follows. If it's 10 tefachim high and 4 by 4 tefachim wide, so it has the dimensions of a Rishus HaYachid, it's a Rishus HaYachid. And as a result, he can't carry to it from the Rishus Harabim, and he can't, or from it to the Rishus Harabim, because that's carrying from Rishus Harabim to Rishus HaYachid, or from the Rishus HaYachid to the Rishus Harabim, which is Asr. The Brisa continues and says, less than this, if it's less than 10 tefachim high, or less than 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, he can carry. Now, why is he allowed to carry, for example, if it's 8 tefachim high and 4 by 4 tefachim wide? It's a Karmelis, so Rashi will address that. But at any rate, the Brisa says that if it's less than 10 tefachim high, or less than 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, he's allowed to carry to the box and from the box. And the Brisa concludes and says, V'chein beguman, so too by a pit. The same din that we just said by a box also applies to a pit. So the Gemara now leads into its question and says, My lava seifa? Isn't it also going on the seifa? When it says v'chein beguma, the simple way of understanding it is that everything we said about the box is also by a pit. What we said in the Reish about the box applies to a pit, and what we said in the seifa about a box applies to the pit. Now in the seifa we said if it's less than 10 tefachim, or less than 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, a person is allowed to carry to the box and from the box. Now let's look at a pit. It cannot mean that if it's 8 tefachim, a person could carry to it and from it, because we know that a pit that's 8 tefachim deep and 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide is a Karmelis. So which pit is this referring to? It would seem that it must be referring to a pit that's 9 tefachim deep and 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. That's the pit a person is allowed to carry to from the Rishus Harabim and from it to the Rishus Harabim. Now, from there we see that a pit that's 9 tefachim deep and 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide is a Rishus Harabim. That's why a person can carry to it from the Rishus Harabim and from it to the Rishus Harabim. So this is a question on Rava, who said that this pit is not considered part of the Rishus Harabim. So Rava answered, Loi areisha. No, it's only referring to the reisha. When we said v'chein beguma, the same as by a pit, it means to say the first thing we said about the box is also true about the pit. That if it's 10 tefachim high and 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, a person cannot carry to the box and from the box. So too by a pit, if it's 10 tefachim deep and 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide, a person cannot carry to the pit and from the pit, because the pit's a Rishus HaYachid and he's in the Rishus Harabim. So that's how Rava answered the first question that Rav Adda bar Masna asked from a Brisa. The Gemara now continues and presents a second question from Rav Adda bar Masna. He asks from a Brisa, and we'll have the same similar structure. We're going to have the Brisa quoted in an arrow pointing upwards and downwards. Then we'll have an analysis on the Brisa, once again an arrow pointing upwards and downwards. And then it's going to lead into the question itself. So the Gemara begins by quoting a Brisa that says, if a person was shavis in a Rishus Harabim and placed his Eruv in a pit. So briefly, the idea of an Eruv is a person is not allowed to walk outside of the city if in every direction there's just an empty expanse, there's no other cities. A person is not allowed to walk out of that city on Shabbos more than 2,000 amas. If a person desires to go further than that, what he's able to do is he could be shavis, he could rest at a distance of, let's say, 1,500 amas outside of the city. He could have food over there, which establishes that this is his place, and then he's allowed to carry an additional 2,000 amas, and he can also carry to the city because it's within 2,000 amas. Now the din is that a person has to be able to eat the Eruv in the place that he's shavis. So if the person is in one place and he put his Eruv somewhere else, he has to be able to bring the Eruv to him and eat it in order for it to be considered a valid Eruv. So it says in a Brisa, if a person was shavis in a Rishus Harabim and places Eruv in a pit, now he needs to be able to bring the Eruv to him and eat it where he is in order for it to be considered a valid Eruv. So the Brisa says the din is, if it's above 10 tefachim, then it's good, because he's allowed to bring this Eruv to him. And we'll discuss in a minute what it means above 10 tefachim. He's allowed to bring this Eruv to him to eat it on Shabbos, where he is shavis, outside of the pit. So it's a good Eruv. And if it's lower than 10 tefachim, it's not a good Eruv, because he's not permitted to take the Eruv from the pit to where he is, outside of the pit, and eat it. And therefore the Eruv is not good, because he has to be able to eat it where he was shavis, where he rested. So the Gemara now analyzes this Brisa, we'll come to a conclusion which will lead into our question. Says the Gemara, how is this case? What does it mean above 10 tefachim and lower than 10 tefachim? If it's a pit that's 10 tefachim deep, and like we explained, it doesn't mean exactly 10, it means at least 10. So let's say 15 tefachim deep. So if we're going to say that the Bryce is referring to a pit that's 15 tefachim deep, and when it says above 10 tefachim, and above means it was raised, the person raised it. It wasn't in the bottom part of the pit. It wasn't 10 tefachim deep, less than 10 tefachim deep. That's what it means. So then it'll be a good eruv. And below means that it was lowered, and it was with lower than 10 tefachim in the pit. If that's what we're going to explain, it means that when the Brisa says above and below, it refers to the eruv being raised or lowered. That won't make any sense. Why not? It shouldn't matter since they're in two rishuyos. A pit that's 10 tefachim or deeper and 4 by 4 tefachim wide is a rishus hayachid. Whether the actual eruv is lowered in the pit or raised in the pit doesn't matter. The eruv is in a rishus hayachid, so it comes out that hu b'makom echad ve'eruv b'makom acher. He's in one place and his eruv is in another place. He's in a rishus harabim in one rishus, and his eruv is in a rishus hayachid, a different rishus. He's not allowed to carry the eruv to where he is. So in either case, whether it was lowered or raised, it shouldn't be a valid eruv because he's not permitted to eat it where he is. He's in a rishus harabim, and the eruv is in a rishus hayachid. So rather, we must say it's a pit that's not 10. In other words, what we're saying is that above 10, it's good, is referring to one pit, and lower than 10, it's not, is referring to another pit. So if it's above 10 means a pit that's less than 10 tefachim deep, and lower than 10 means a pit that is 10 tefachim deep. So that's why, if it's 10 tefachim deep, it's not a good eruv, because it's a rishus hayachid. He's not allowed to bring it out to where he is in the rishus harabim. But if it's less than 10 tefachim deep, he's allowed to bring it to himself. Now, which pit is this referring to? Says the Gemara into its question. So we see that tashmish al yedei adchak shmei tashmish. When it says lower than 10 tefachim, it's a good eruv. Which pit is this? If it's 8 tefachim deep and 4 by 4 tefachim wide, so we have 8 tefachim in depth and 4 by 4 tefachim in width, it's a carmelist. He's not allowed to bring it to him. So it must be referring to a pit that's 9 tefachim deep and 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. And we see he's allowed to bring it to him. So we see that it is a rishus harabim. It is part of the public area because the public use it. And although it's al yedei adchak, we see over here the tashmish al yedei adchak shmei tashmish. Even though it's not convenient, it's inconvenient, it's difficult, it's still used by the public, therefore considered part of the public area, part of the rishus harabim. He's allowed to bring it to him. So here we have a question. So just let's summarize that question one more time. It says above 10 tefachim it's good, and lower than 10 it's not. So we said above must mean that the pit is less than 10 tefachim deep. So which pit is less than 10 tefachim deep and a person is allowed to carry to where he is? It must be the one that's 9 tefachim deep. So it is considered a rishus harabim. So Rava has this question on him, and he would answer it in different ways. Sometimes he would answer, it's all in a carmelis. In other words, the pit is considered a carmelis. And it's referring to a case where he's in a carmelis, and that's why he's allowed to bring it out. He's allowed to bring it out. It's a good eruv because it's not two rishuyos. It's not the pit is a carmelis and he's in a rishus harabim. So therefore we needed to conclude that the pit's also rishus harabim. No, rather the pit is a carmelis. So why is he allowed to bring it out of the pit to where he is in the rishus harabim? Because he's not in a rishus harabim. It's referring to a case that he's in a carmelis. Now we need to complete this answer. If it's referring to a case that he's in a carmelis, if we look at the Brisa, it says if a person was shevis in a rishus harabim. So Rava completes the answer and supports it. And why does it say rishus harabim? Because it's not a rishus hayachid, and like Rashi will explain this a little more. But the point is, when it says if a person was shevis in a rishus harabim, it doesn't mean he was in a rishus harabim. It means if he wasn't in a rishus hayachid. If he's not in a rishus hayachid, so it doesn't mean specifically a rishus harabim. It's referring to a carmelis. And once again, in Rashi we'll speak a little more about this answer. That why does it say then rishus harabim? So it's really referring to a carmelis, and therefore the pit is a carmelis, and he's allowed to bring it out because he's in a carmelis. So that's one answer that Rava would give to understand this brisa. At other times he answered with a different answer. At times he said the eruv is in a carmelis. The eruv is in a carmelis, and he's in a rishus harabim, and still he's allowed to bring it. It is a good eruv because he's allowed to carry out and eat it. What does that mean? So the explanation is that a person has to be able to eat his eruv not throughout the whole Shabbos. He has to be able to eat it bein hashmoshes, between when the sun sets and before the stars come out, which is a doubt whether it's still Friday or it's already Shabbos. It's a time of doubt. It's bein hashmoshes. It's between the sun and between The moon, it's a time in between, which is a time of doubt. And that's the time a person has to be able to eat his Erev. So the pit is a Carmelist, and he is in a Rosh Hashanah, and still the Erev is valid. Why? So he completes the answer. So the answer is that the Erev is in a Carmelist, and he's in a Rosh Hashanah. And what's the explanation? That the Erev is valid? And it follows Rebbe that says there's no Shvus Bein Hashmashos. To carry from a Carmelist to Rosh Hashanah is not Asr min HaTorah. It's only Asr from Midrabanan. So it's considered a shvus. It's not min HaTorah, it's only a shvus. And Rebbe holds that there are no shvus. We don't hold of any, there's no shvus, we don't, the dinim of shvus do not apply bein hashmashis. And therefore, bein hashmashis, a person is allowed to carry from the Carmelists to the Rosh Hashanah. So it comes out, he's able to eat his Erev where he is at the time when he needs to be able to do that, which is bein hashmashis. Now we're done over here with the two questions on Rava, and Rava responding to them. So Rava explained that these questions from the Brises could be answered. They don't necessarily conclude that a pit that's 9 tefachim deep and 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide is a Rosh Hashanah. Now the Gemara is going to continue into a long proof that Rava is going to present to say that my answers are not just I'm pushing off your questions. It's not just that I'm able to interpret the Brises in such a way that they're not difficult for me, but rather the way I interpreted them is the correct interpretation. It's not just another way. Usually when we have a question from a Brisa, the response will be, well, that's one way of looking at the Brisa, but there's another way. But we don't know which one is necessarily, so to speak, correct. There are just two interpretations. And since there are two, the opinion cannot be challenged anymore. Rava now is going to go on and say, it's not just that I'm offering another interpretation of the Brisa so that it shouldn't be difficult for me, but rather the interpretations that I presented must be correct. And the reason is because Rava now will prove that tashmish al yedei adchak lo yishmei tashmish. Use, which is difficult and inconvenient, is not considered use. And therefore the use of the pit, since it's difficult and inconvenient, is not considered use, and therefore would not be considered part of the Rosh Hashanah. So now what we're going to do is we're going to move into an extended proof from Rava that his opinion is the one that's correct. So because it's so long, we're going to have to push aside this flowchart and move into another flowchart. So out of the three responses that Rava gave, so we have the arrows coming from all three responses, Rava says, the light tema, don't say that it's just a possible answer. Rather, it's certainly correct. I'm not just being doiche you, pushing you off. Rather, I'm saying it specifically. The answers I gave must be the way we interpret these Brises. So it's coming from it, and it's leading down into the proof. And what's the proof that Rava brings? So we're going to have an arrow that comes from the proof and leads into the next discussion of what he presents there. And then that over there, the information we're going to have is going to lead into the final proof. So he says, we learned in a Mishnah, it says, this is the quote from the Mishnah, if there was a pool of water and the public walks through it, it's a pool of water that the public doesn't walk through. The din is if one throws 4 amas into it, he's chayev. So there's a pool of water, it's not such a deep pool of water, the public will walk through it. So if a person threw an object from a distance of 4 amas in the Rosh Hashanah and it landed in the pool, he's chayev, because the pool's part of the Rosh Hashanah, so he threw something 4 amas in Rosh Hashanah. The Mishnah continues and says, and how deep can it be that it still be considered part of the Rosh Hashanah when the public walks through it? Less than 10 tefachim. The Mishnah continues on and says, in a pool of water that the public walks through, if one throws 4 amas into it, he's chayev. So the Mishnah repeats itself. It seems to say the same teaching twice. So let's analyze this Mishnah. So we have an analysis which is coming from the Mishnah and it's going to lead into the proof. It makes sense that it says pool of water twice. The Gemara says this, that it speaks about a pool of water twice. It says a pool of water a person's chayev by. A pool of water a person's chayev by. We could understand because it's talking about 2 different pools of water. And we need to teach both of them. So the Gemara explains, one for the summer and one for the winter. One for the B'yamei Sachama and one for B'yamei Saksham, the rainy season. Why would we need 2? So the Gemara explains, and we need both. We need to say a pool of water by the summer season is considered part of the Rosh Hashanah, and a pool of water in the rainy season is part of the Rosh Hashanah. Why do we need both? Because if it said summer, then people may want to cool themselves, But the winter, we'd say, is different. We'd say the reason by the summer a pool of water is part of the Rosh Hashanah because people want to go into it. They want to get a little bit refreshed. They want to get wet so that they cool themselves off. So we'd say only in the summer is a pool of water considered part of the Rosh Hashanah, but not in the winter. A person doesn't want to get wet in the winter. And if we said only the winter, and if it said winter, the pool of water in the winter is part of the Rosh Hashanah, then people are dirty anyway, but not the summer. We'd say in the winter a pool of water is part of the Rosh Hashanah because people are already wet, they're already dirty, they're not going to pay so much attention to stepping in a puddle. But in the summer, a person wants to avoid that. So it comes out that we need both of them. But we lead into a question which is, but why say the public walks twice? It should have said a pool of water that the public walks in. If a person throws in it 4 amos, is chayiv, and a pool of water that somebody throws in 4 amos, a person's chayiv. We need to speak about 2 pools of water. But why does he need to mention that a person walks in twice? Rava takes from here that this type of walking is clearly not considered comfortable walking. It's ayidei adchak. From here we see the Bryce is emphasizing if people walk in it, only if they walk in it, although it's inconvenient, we're going to consider it part of the Rosh Hashanah. This shows that hiluch b'shas adchak shmei hiluch, but not tashmish. The Bryce is writing it twice by saying once we already know that hiluch, that walking, even though it's uncomfortable, makes the area part of the Rosh Hashanah. Why does it say it twice? It's trying to emphasize walking, only walking, as opposed to what is the only thing we could exclude? Usage. You walking Yadei Adchak is considered good walking. It's considered part of the Rosh Hashanah in the area, but not tashmish. Then with that we have the proof of Rava, and now we can move on to the last and final part of the Gemara, which we said is a teaching, like Tosfos will explain why it's connected, a teaching related to the case of Ula, and that is from Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda said regarding a bundle of reeds. So if a person has a bundle of reeds, the din is, and if he carries it in a certain manner, he will be putter. Regarding a bundle of reeds, if one throws it down and straightens it out over and over, he isn't chayiv unless he lifts the whole thing. So just show a visual of that. There's a bundle of reeds, a person throws it down, Rama v'zakfe, and straightens it. Rama v'zakfe. And again, Rama v'zakfe, he's not chayiv until he lifts it up. In this case, a person will not be chayiv because he never lifted up the whole bundle of reeds, or we'll see other possible ways that he could be chayiv. So he won't be chayiv in that case. He won't be chayiv in that case because he didn't pick it up. So just to summarize the Gemara, we began with a teaching from Ula about an amud, a post in the Rosh Hashanah that's 9 tefachim high and 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim wide. Ula said that since the public use it, it's not considered separate from the public area. It's considered part of the public area. It's considered a Rosh Hashanah. And then we moved on to 2 things related to this. First, the question about a pit that's 9 tefachim deep. We had a machlekes there. Rav Yosef said that it's considered the same as the post. It is part of the Rosh Hashanah, and Rava said it's not. The Gemara then presented 2 questions on Rava. To the first question, Rava gave 1 answer. To the second question, he gave 2 answers. Then we moved on to a proof that Rava presented to say that his way of learning the Brises is not just a possible way of learning it. Rather, we must learn it that way because he can prove that tashmish al-yadei adchak is leishmei tashmish, so we must find alternative ways of learning the Brises that seem to indicate otherwise. And then we concluded at the end with 1 teaching, like Tosfos will explain, that's connected to the teaching of Ula, that Rama by a bundle of reeds, if somebody doesn't fully pick it up, rather he knocks it over and straightens it up, and he rolls it over like that, he won't be chayiv unless he lifts the whole thing off the ground and carries it.